to a $5 billion increase in demand deposits and hence in the total money supply of the country. If banks remain fully loaded, then the amount that in the aggregate they will pyramid on top of reserve can be precisely known as the inverse of the minimum reserve requirement. Thus, if the legal reserve requirement is 1 per 5 total reserve per total deposits, the bank will be able to pyramid 5 per 1 on top of new reserve. If the reserve requirement is 1 per 10, then the bank will be able to pyramid 10 per 1 on top of total new reserve. The amount banks can pyramid new deposits on top of reserve is called the money multiplier, which is the inverse of the minimum reserve requirement. Since banks earn their profits by creating new money and lending it out, banks will keep fully loaned up unless highly unusual circumstances prevail. Since the origin of the Federal Reserve System, U.S. banks have remained fully loaned up except during the Great Depression of the 1930s, when banks were understandably fearful of bankruptcies crashing around them and could find new borrowers who could be trusted to remain solvent and repay the loan. In that area, the banks allow excess reserve to pile up, that is, reserve upon which they did not pyramid loans and deposits by the legally permissible money multiplier. The determinants of the money supply under central banking then are reserve requirements and total reserves. The central bank can determine the amount of the money supply at any time by manipulating and controlling either the reserve requirements and or the total of commercial bank reserves. In the United States, Congressional, Statute, and Federal Reserve Board dictation combine to fix legal reserve requirements. Let us see what happens when the reserve requirement is changed. Suppose that the Fed cuts the reserve requirement in half, from 20% to 10%, a seemingly extreme example which had, however, been realistic at various times in American history. Let us see the result. The banks are fully loaned up with total reserve of $10 billion in legal reserve requirement at 20% and demand deposits therefore at $50 billion. Now in figure 9.11, we see what happens when the Fed lowers the reserve requirement to 10%. Because of the halving of reserve requirements, the banks have now expanded another $50 billion of loans and investment IOUs, thereby increasing demand deposits by another $50 billion. Total demand deposits in the country are now $100 billion, and the total money supply has now increased by $50 billion. One way for the central bank to inflate bank money and the money supply then is to lower the fractional reserve requirement. When the Federal Reserve System was established in 1913, the Fed lowered reserve requirements from 21% to 10% by 1917, thereby enabling a concurrent doubling of the money supply at the advent of World War I. In 1936 and 1937, after 4 years of money and price inflation during an unprecedentedly severe depression under the New Deal, the Fed, frightened of a piling up of excess reserve that could later explode inflation, quickly doubled bank reserve requirements from approximately 10% to 20%. Frightened that its doubling had to precipitate the severe recession of 1938, the Fed has since been very cautious about changing reserve requirements, usually doing so by only 1/4 to 1/2 of 1% at a time, generally due to the inflationary nature of all central banking. The Fed has lower requirements. Raising reserve requirements then is contractionary and deflationary. Lowering them is inflationary. But since the Fed's actions in this area are cautious and gradual, the Fed's most important day-to-day instrument of control of the money supply has been to fix and determine total bank reserves. Chapter 10: Central Banking: Determining Total Reserves. The crucial question then is, what determines the level of total bank reserves at any given time? There are several important determinants which can be grouped into two classes: those controlled by action of the public or the market, and those controlled by the central bank. The demand forecast. The major action by the public determining total bank reserves is its demand forecast. We saw how the public's increased demand forecast will put contractionary pressure on the bank, while decreased desired forecast will aid to its inflation of the money supply. Let us now repeat this for the aggregate of commercial banks. Let us assume that the public's demand forecast in exchange for its demand deposits increase. In Figure 10.1 show a hypothetical banking system, and Figure 10.2 show the immediate effect on it of an increase in the public's demand forecast, that is, their redeeming some of its deposit forecast. The hypothetical banking system is predicted as one with a 20% reserve ratio fully loaded up. Reserves in the commercial bank's asset column are of course exactly equal to demand deposits to bank in the central bank liabilities column, since they are one and the same thing. The asset side of the central bank balance sheet is not being considered here. In our example, we simply assume that central bank notes outstanding in the hands of the public is $15 billion. Total money supply in the country then is demand deposits plus central bank notes. Now let us assume that the public wishes to draw down its demand deposits by $2 billion in order to obtain cash. In order to obtain cash, which we will assume is central bank notes, the banks must go to the Fed and draw down $2 billion worth of their checking accounts or demand deposits at the Fed. In short, depositors demand $2 billion in cash. The bank go to the central bank to buy the $2 billion, and the central bank in exchange print $2 billion of new notes and gives them to the banks. At the end of step 1, then the money supply remains the same, since demand deposits have gone down by $2 billion, but central bank notes outstanding have increased by the same amount. The composition of the money supply have been changed, but not that the total. The money supply is still $65 billion, except that there is now $2 billion less of demand deposits and $2 billion more of central bank loans in the hands of the public. But this is only the first step, because the crucial fact is that bank reserves have also gone down by $2 billion by the same amount that central bank notes in the hand of the public have increased. But since reserves have gone down, the bank keep fully loaned up. This means that banks must contract their loans and demand deposits until the new total of deposits is again brought down